Hello and welcome back to another episode of the ShefF1 Podcast. I'm Rudy Brown and joining me as always is Seb Austin and Amy Hammerslag. We've had a whole week without Formula 1 since the Chinese Grand Prix, but now we've got the not so highly anticipated Miami Grand Prix coming up this weekend. Now, if you watched our pre-season predictions at the start of the season, you'll know that this was a unanimous decision between the three of us that this would be the worst race of the whole season. And I think our choices were justified, really, because, you know, in the past 2 years, we've had two pretty dull Miami Grand Prix, I think it's safe to say. But Seb, are there any sort of, redeeming factors on the horizon? Could there maybe be some, spanners in the works of the Miami Grand Prix weekend, which might see some entertainment for us?
Yeah, I think that there will be a spanner in the works this time. I don't think it'll be track specific. I don't think it would be because of the track, but obviously sprint weekend, back-to-back sprint weekends, I think that could throw up something different. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see how the teams adapt. But also, a couple of teams bringing upgrades, a couple of teams not bringing upgrades. Obviously, Red Bull and Ferrari not bringing upgrades, but then McLaren and Mercedes are, so that could throw a spanner in the works. Obviously, bringing upgrades to a sprint race is obviously a bit strange because you've got such little time to find out whether the upgrades actually work before you have to go into Parc Ferme, so that'll be... it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, in the midfield as well, RB and Haas bringing upgrades. Then they're the two sides that have been actually probably the best out of the midfield. Could they start to pull away and maybe compete with like the likes of Aston Martin potentially to get into that top five? So I do think there's a few talking points. Obviously, Logan Sargeant as well. A lot of rumours about this potentially being his last race, and it's his home race, so a lot of pressure on him. I think this weekend is going to be better than we originally expected. I know, well, at least I hope so anyway.
Yeah, Amy, there's been lots of drama off track as well. You and Seb did two great videos earlier this week about the departure of Adrian Newey, which has been announced by Red Bull this afternoon. That will happen at the start of the 2025 year. And Nico Hulkenburg jumping ship from Haas to Sauber. But Seb just alluded to it then, Logan Sargeant possibly on his way out. Do you reckon that's the right decision from Williams to kick him out so early into just his second season in the sport?
I think it's really harsh. I do think maybe, the names that are rumoured, Kimi Antonelli, and he's not even 18. I think if they were to do that, that's saying that we don't know who could come in and have that seat. But I think that'd be just even sillier. I mean, Logan Sargeant, he hasn't been terrible. They've definitely had worse drivers, Williams. He's not had a chance the last 3 races to even have his own car. So, he needs to have a bit longer. I do think, they should be thinking about maybe switching him out for maybe the end of the season. I think definitely, should be looking at that and, proving himself for that. But in one race, it's not going to work like that. You don't put a pressure on a driver like that. He needs longer to prove himself. So it's really harsh on him, I think.
I think, obviously, the prime candidate to replace him is this, wonder kid star boy Kimi Antonelli. But I don't really see the logic there. I mean, you look at Logan Sargeant's rookie year in F2, not last year, but the year before, and it was really strong. He was, I think, the highest performing rookie on the grid, which, what earned him this contract for Williams for what you thought was the foreseeable future. But no, it might not be that case. And Kimi Antonelli, don't get me wrong, amazing track record, and I do hold him in a very high regard. But surely, I think if you have that driver with the lack of experience underperforming in a car that hasn't quite been as good as it was for the last 2 seasons, maybe bringing in experience would make a bit more sense there, especially when Alex Albon is struggling as well, and they've certainly built that team around him, and that car just doesn't look to be up to standard for Williams. And so, an experienced head to properly rival and mentor Albon as well, who of course is still, in the, first half of his career. I don't know, maybe Antonelli just, it seems as though they're jumping the gun a bit, obviously Mercedes Junior, and I don't know. It would be a shame, especially at his home race, to kick him out for the remainder of the season, Logan Sargeant. But that's just the reality of it. The results haven't really been good enough, and I don't know about you, Seb, but I've not seen too many signs of improvement from him.
No, I haven't seen a lot from Sargeant this year to suggest that he's making that step up that maybe we thought he would. Back in the last year, obviously in Vegas, looked like he was starting to make that step up. It hasn't. I don't think he's really had the opportunity to. I think the Williams last year was better than this year, and he hasn't really had the car behind him or beneath him to actually perform. So I do think he deserves more time, and I also think that point about then bringing in Antonelli, I don't see the point in that for Williams at all, because it's not like he's their driver. Sure, if he was their academy driver and you know that he could be there for the long term, then sure, it might be a good idea to bring him in. But you are basically just helping another team. Like, it's not going to help them at all. He's not going to help develop the car significantly. He hasn't got the experience to do that. He's short term. I think in the short term, they should be looking to be their own team. And I think that's what the aspirations they have, is to be their own outright team. The team that maybe they put out drivers on loan to other teams, not the team that are bringing in drivers on loan. And I think that an experienced head, maybe like, if Bottas doesn't get a seat, or maybe a Perez or something like that, if they can get them in, I think that would be a far better solution, because at the moment the car's not good enough and they need to develop the car if they're going to ever get anywhere. And bringing in a young, inexperienced driver who's probably going to, have a fair few incidents, I don't see the logic in it for Williams. And I think that, for Mercedes, it would be perfect to put him in there, get some experience in F1 before potentially getting the Mercedes seat next year or in the next couple of years. But I don't see what's in it for Williams.
Yeah, I mean, Antonelli in F2 at the moment, he's not exactly hit the ground running. It's not been a bad start by, any sort of large means, but we were expecting maybe a little bit more. But of course, he is still a child, and there's, that lack of experience, and obviously that huge expectation, driving for Premier. It all just seems as though all he had to do was get in the car and drive it round. But no, it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. But you did just allude to it then, that move, Valtteri Bottas back to Williams. I've never really thought about it before, but it makes so much sense now that you brought it up. Of course, ex-Williams driver, obviously moved to Mercedes afterwards, but had, really successful few years at Williams. And I don't know, obviously Hulkenburg moving to Sauber, it looks as though there's, no real room for Bottas in that team anymore. It hasn't been a great couple of seasons for him, This season's been a bit of a slow start, more based on the team on that side. But, last season, Bottas definitely wasn't up to his best. Maybe a return on the cards for Bottas back to Williams. I would like that a lot. But we'll move away from all that drama now. You obviously did your own videos on the Adrian Newey thing, so there's not really much else to say. But I think if we just do a little prediction thing, where do we reckon he's going to end up, Amy? I'll start with you.
I think Ferrari. I've seen some reports today on Twitter that the announcement could come as soon as Miami, and I've also seen a lot of thing about Adrian Newey speaking about the teams that are looking at him. He said about he doesn't have the greatest relationship with Toto, doesn't like the fact that Lawrence Stroll is offering all this money, and then he'd go and then Lawrence Stroll then sells the team. He doesn't like that idea. And then McLaren, he was talking about McLaren actually and said, I've worked there before and I want a new thing. And then Ferrari was like, I'm quite interested in it. So yeah, and I just would love him there because everyone wants to work with that iconic team. And yeah, it'd be a great send off for him, obviously, as he's getting older, to leave the sport and win a championship with Ferrari.
What about you, Seb?
Yeah, I think Ferrari for me seems like the most likely one. I think obviously we talked about it in the video, but it seemed to come out more in, like, as Amy said on Twitter, that that's the only serious option he's considering. Something I found, crazy was the no garden leave for him. I thought he was going to have to, sit on the sidelines like he did when he was at Williams back in the day. I thought he was going to have to sit on the sidelines for quite a while, but it seems he's going to, just be allowed to leave. His lawyers have managed to get it that he's going to be able to leave as early as 2025, which would be crazy if he could get in there at Ferrari just in time to work on the new regulations. I think that would be perfect for them. Having Lewis Hamilton as well, I think that could be a really, really exciting partnership.
Yeah, and then the sort of big question is, who do Red Bull find to replace him? Because of course he is, irreplaceable. Not to sort of be, uninventive with my words, but it's so difficult to find someone that will be able to replicate his success, because there's no doubt that Adrian Newey is one of a kind in terms of, that technical mind. And truthfully, my knowledge on the sort of talent pool in, engineers and aerodynamicists and stuff like that isn't too vast. So I couldn't really put any names forward, to be honest. If anyone's got any, then please throw them forward now. But it's going to be a huge task for Red Bull to try and rebuild, from this huge loss, especially if he goes to Ferrari, that just seems to be the team most likely to bring the fight to them now with, Lewis Hamilton there, the ambitions of Fred Vasseur. And then if Adrian Newey's added to the mix, they could be absolutely unstoppable. So while the future looks good for Ferrari, their car this weekend won't, basically. They've got this big sort of partnership with HP for the Miami Grand Prix weekend, one of their title sponsors, and there's now blue on the car. Now, you guys were appalled and outraged in the chat that, before we started recording. I mean, what Amy, what is there to be angry about?
Because I love blue, and, like, it takes me a lot. It takes a lot for me to be able to buy Ferrari merch, because I have, in football in terms, a big hatred for Liverpool, and I'm an Evertonian, and I just thought it would be beautiful after beating them in the derby to end their title hopes, Ferrari go blue, because, the big blue, Charles Leclerc, who's big Evertonian if you haven't heard, and and I just would have loved nothing more than, it's just different, it's so different. Like, whenever do we see a car for Ferrari that's not red? Never. And it's just like the tiniest bits of blue, and it's not even the blue I like, so I had such high it's Man City blue, and I had such high expectations. And the HP thing, is that going to be for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think it's
I'm
quite
so
a long
annoyed
contract.
because I just love how Ferrari is so traditional and being Scuderia Ferrari, and now HP, like the sauce,
Are you serious? I thought the HP thing was just for Miami. I didn't realise
that's their new name. Scuderia Ferrari HP, not like the classic name of Marlboro in the past, or even Mission Winnow wasn't that bad. Like, that was still kind of cool. HP. I mean, it looks good on like the Spurs kit in 2013 when it was a white background. On a red background, it looks so bad. I thought it might look quite cool this weekend if it was all blue. They're going, like all the Dynaco cars.
Dynaco, yeah.
I thought it was going to look so cool, but it just looks rubbish. It's made an actually like a really nice looking car look awful.
Yeah, because the Ferrari is beautiful this year.
Even if it was more blue, maybe if it was like like Barcelona sort of red and blue, maybe that would look quite cool. But just being like bits of blue on the front wing where it says HP, like, it looks rubbish. It just looks like a sponsorship sort of thing. So.
I was sold a dream. I was going to be able to get blue Ferrari merch, and I was like, I can wear this to Everton games, it's going to be fine. My dad won't be annoyed at me for having more red stuff.
To be fair, they could still have like the blue caps. I reckon they
could. They are selling that.
Yeah,
the overalls are nice.
Yeah, nice.
That's all blue, isn't it?
So.
But not the car.
I think, to be honest, I'm quite glad it's not all blue, because a Ferrari that isn't red for me is just utterly blasphemous. I think.
Yeah, but for 1 week.
Yeah, one week.
Well, Lightning McQueen, he was red for his whole life, but the dreams of the blue. Oh.
Yeah, you've got to love the blues.
Exactly.
That's how they call it, the blues.
Champions of the world. That's what they wanted to look like.
But let's just take a step back and deep it a little bit. It is just some paint on a car.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
let's talk about the racing now. So for those of you new around here, we'll delve into our predictions, and we basically have set categories for each race weekend, including sprint race weekends as well. And there's points up for grabs for each category that we get correct. And we have a big leaderboard, and at the end of the season we'll decide what happens to the winner and the loser and stuff like that. So we've got a sprint weekend coming up, of course, at Miami. So that means we will start off with our sprint pole position predictions. That is really difficult. But Seb, who have you said for sprint pole?
I've gone, really boring. I've gone for Max Verstappen. Even though they're not bringing any upgrades and the teams around them are, I think obviously last year, he wasn't able to get on pole position because of the red flag and he was starting 9th or whatever, but he showed in the race and he showed he's got pace around Miami, he's got pace around this circuit. He absolutely cruised to victory when, it looked like Checo was actually in good form. I can see this weekend being a really dominant, weekend from Max. I think obviously it's just Max Verstappen, isn't it? I think it's going to be a Max Verstappen weekend. China was obviously in the end it was good, obviously in the race, but sprint qualifying wasn't perfect. So I think this weekend is going to be utterly dominant.
Yeah, I won't waste any time and admit, Seb, that I'm with you. It's difficult to predict anyone else, really. And, Max Verstappen, Miami, sprint races, it all just falls quite nicely into an easy prediction. But, Amy, have you gone for someone else?
Yeah. I've gone for Lando Norris. I think, obviously, McLaren are bringing the upgrades. I think for 1 week alone, because Ferrari bring them in Imola, but I do think McLaren are going to bring the fight to the Red Bulls. Red Bull will probably go miles ahead once again when they bring theirs next week, upgrades, but I do think, we are saying that it's going to be hard for them to understand what the upgrades are, because they're only going to have one practice session, But I believe in Lando Norris, and I believe that after China, he's going to make sure he wants to be on that pole position so he can go and make up for his mistake and get, his first win. So that's why I just think Lando Norris is going to win something this week.
After having a look at the weather forecast, I'm not too sure about the Lando Norris sprint pole position prediction, to be fair. It is looking pretty dry for the whole weekend, 29 degrees according to Apple Weather. So take it with a pinch of salt, because they're usually quite wrong, but there's 0% chance of rain for the most part, which is terribly upsetting, because I think we need a bit of rain to make Miami a bit interesting. Of course, overtaking's pretty difficult around that circuit, and I don't know, in terms of the qualities that it has, I suppose straight line speed is an advantage to have, which is good for McLaren, I suppose. So will Max Verstappen convert that sprint pole into a sprint race win, and who will join him on the podium, Seb?
Yes, I do think he will convert the sprint pole into sprint victory. I've gone for Max Verstappen to win. I'm going to go for Sergio Perez. I think that he had a good qualifying there last year. Obviously not the best race, but still, it was okay. And I think that, he'll continue his decent form so far in the season, pick up a P2, and I'm going for Lando Norris P3. I believe in the McLaren upgrades. As you'll see later on in my predictions, I have definitely gone for McLaren a lot. I think that Lando Norris, he's in really good form as well. The start of the season has been really good.
Yeah, I'm with you, Seb, with a cheeky Red Bull 1-2 on the Saturday. But my third place man is actually Fernando Alonso. I think he was just really impressive around China, especially when, other cars look to be a lot quicker than him. But, with the less practice session, I think his experience is so valuable in terms of, finding a setup pretty quickly for the car. And he's had success around Miami in the past. He's had a podium there last year. And he's just a driver, again, in pretty reasonably good form. So I think he'll just convert, whatever he can do with such little time to develop the car, on the Friday into a decent result on the Saturday. So, P3 for Alonso and Max and Perez 1 and 2. Amy, who have you said?
I've gone for Lando Norris to finally get his first win. I don't know. I just have so much faith in these upgrades that I think that, Red Bull are going to struggle to overtake. And, we've seen Red Bull actually struggle setting up the car earlier on in a race. They've, only maybe sorted out once they're in Q3. So, I feel like it's only early in the weekend, obviously, the sprint race and sprint quali. So I think Lando's going to, like we said, it's hard to overtake around Miami. So, I think Lando's, it's going to be close. But I've gone with Max and Perez, of course, just 2-3, a double Red Bull podium. It's been a bit of a common theme this year, and I'm going to stick with it to be safe. So hopefully, I could get that completely wrong, and Max is going to win, Perez is going to get second, and Lando's going to get third. But that is my podium.
Let's just waste no time with this next prediction and all come out clean and say that we were predicting Max Verstappen to be on pole position in Saturday's qualifying session. Again, it just makes as much sense as the sprint pole one, except he's had more time to work on the car and find an even faster setup for all of our entertainment. Max Verstappen to finish on pole on Saturday. But just because he finishes on the first slot on the grid doesn't necessarily mean he'll be the star of qualifying. I say this every episode.
I love that.
We've got our star of qualifying category now. Seb, who have you said?
So just because Max was on pole doesn't mean he was my star of qualifying. I've gone for Lando Norris. So I'm repeating the McLaren sort of hype train. I think that, he's not going to be on pole position, but he's going to have an absolute stonker of a lap. I reckon P2 in qualifying, and I think that's enough for, I think once he's had, come out of the park firmly, things like that, I think McLaren will get it right. I think other teams, we've seen Mercedes, getting it wrong, and they're another team bringing upgrades. I think they could be up there. I don't think it'll be Hamilton. He's clearly just doesn't get his setup right. So I've gone for Lando Norris.
Amy, what about you? I mean, I'm looking at our grid now.
I'm shocked myself. I went to check what I put and I went, what was thinking with it? And I've gone with Logan Sargeant, and that is due to, I think, he's got pressure on him this weekend, but I think he's going to deliver. I do. And he's going to keep his seat. And he's
is that a prediction that you want to happen, or a prediction that you genuinely think will happen?
I really want him to prove people wrong. I think he, when he came in last season, I was a bit harsh on him, and I was like, why is he coming in? But now I actually, he's been here, he's trying, and just luck is not going his way, and it's genuinely not his fault. Like when you see Latifi, doing stuff wrong, and, Nikita Mazepin, that was a driver ability, that was their own fault. Logan Sargeant, not the best, but he's certainly not the worst. And I just think he deserves a bit more longer to prove himself. And I think he needs to show that across a season, not 5 races in. And yeah, I just hope he goes on to, get start quali. And I think start quali for Williams and Logan Sargeant's getting into Q2 quite high up, but I can't see him being in Q3, but maybe Q2, and that's why he's going to be my start of quali.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to see him have that sort of redemption weekend at his home Grand Prix. He is from Miami, or at least he's from Florida. I think Fort Lauderdale to be specific, but yeah. He's had a pretty, if we remember back to last season's Miami Grand Prix, it was definitely one to forget immediately for him. It was just, no pace all weekend, no luck, bad strategy, nothing went right for him. And maybe we'll see a replica of that this weekend, although if Amy's prediction comes true, we might not. But for my start of qualifying, I've said Valtteri Bottas. Now, this is a guy who's having a pretty quiet season. It's sort of a bit of a blend of the first one he had with Alfa Romeo and the one last season as well. One really good season, one terrible season. This one's been a pretty sort of middle ground of that. And he's outperformed Zhou in every single qualifying session for God knows how long now. And you know what? He's actually starting to build up some reasonable pace. If it wasn't for Stake, Kick, Sauber's incompetence in strategy and actually fitting the tyres on the car, of course that's not relevant to qualifying, but if the team get it right for Bottas this weekend, based off a good qualifying result with the pace that he's starting to develop in that car, which isn't very good, I think it could be a decent qualifying session for Bottas, which will then turn into a decent race as well. Okay, so from the best drivers of qualifying to the worst ones, now it is time for our flop of qualifying prediction. Seb, your one is not exactly surprising considering where your loyalties lie in Formula One. Just tell us all about your flop of qualifying prediction.
I've gone for Esteban Ocon. I think that this isn't based on a lot of logic, seeing as he's had such a good start to the season. Obviously, I think he's 4-0, 5-0, however many races there have been up in qualifying against Gasly. But, last weekend, I don't think he was decent, and he obviously was on the edge of points. I do think it's got to come to an end at some point. Gasly had a really good qualifying here last year. I think it was P5. And I think that, I think Gasly's takes to the track a bit better. And I think that Gasly, now he's got the upgrades under him as well, I think that he will start to now come into his own, understand the car a bit better. And I think that he's going to, quite convincingly outperform Ocon this weekend, or at least I hope he does anyway. I think that just the comparison to what his teammate's going to do is going to make Ocon look like the flop of qualifying.
Well, I mean, interesting you say that. Alpine have had a fairly respectable history around Miami, for the last 2 years that F1 has visited there. Points on both occasions for both drivers as well. I think Gasly did DNF from the last one, but scored in the Miami race before, or vice versa. He's definitely scored points there. But yeah, Ocon, I mean, it has been a solid start to the season for him. And now that Alpine are actually starting to bring in more and more upgrades, it's looking like that maybe points are on the horizon. But yeah, interesting that you say he's going to be the flop. But I do see the logic, although you say there is no sort of backing behind it. But yeah. Amy, who have you said for yours?
I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo. I mean, speaking of Logan Sargeant, obviously having a pressure on his seat, I think Daniel Ricciardo is another driver who's got pressure on his. And even though went too bad in China, in China, and was able to maybe give himself a bit longer, but now I think that it's going to all crash down again and show why his seat is so under pressure. And I think Yuki is just going to, smoke him again.
I think that's a little bit of a harsh prediction. I've got to say, it looked like a really promising weekend in Shanghai for Ricciardo, and my future predictions are going to sort of correlate with that. But for my flop of qualifying, I said George Russell. It's been a decent start to the season for him, albeit, the results haven't been too convincing, but again, that's more on the team side rather than his. He's outperformed Hamilton more often than not, and it's just, there's not been many issues to report from him. He's had more luck go his way than last season, that's for sure, but I think luck-wise, the only way was up for him in terms of, good fortune. He was, really unlucky last year, but I just think it's a case of Mercedes, no idea what their car's going to be like. Seb, you were alluding to it at the start, before we were recording even. They have got upgrades coming in, but due to their sort of, lack of wind tunnel time, they've got no idea as to, what they will make the car do and how and what kind of difference they'll make. And I just think, with the lack of time, without the practice sessions and stuff like that, it could be a pretty shaky weekend for Russell, who hasn't even, he's not got a great track record around Miami either. Although I think he has outperformed Hamilton there for the last 2 years, so maybe he will prove me wrong. But I just couldn't really think of anyone else, to be honest. George Russell did spring to mind, and it was different to what you guys put. So hopefully, for point's sake, we can, claw back on Amy's enormous lead that she's built up at the moment. But we'll move away from qualifying and move on to the race now. I'll get my sort of podium prediction out of the way because it just echoes Seb's sprint race podium prediction. Max, Checo, Norris. I think McLaren will bring some, decent upgrades this weekend. The car suits the track. Lando Norris in fine form at the moment as well, but it won't be enough to topple Red Bull, who have just been unstoppable around Miami for the last 2 years. Amy, who have you said?
I've gone with Max in first, Lando Norris second, and Sergio Perez third. The exact same podium as last week, well, in China. A Norris sandwich, and I just think that's because the McLaren's going to be up to speed with the Red Bulls. Don't think he's going to be fast enough to overtake Max, but definitely Perez. So depending where he finishes in quali, that is. But I'm really backing him this weekend.
Yeah, I've gone for exactly the same podium. I've gone for Max, Norris, Perez. I think that's how qualifying's going to end up, and I think obviously we've alluded to it that the track's difficult to overtake. I think Norris is going to have enough pace like he did last weekend to hold off Perez. But as Amy said, not enough to overtake Max, who was obviously in a league of his own. So I'm going to go for exactly the same podium.
We'll move on to driver of the day. Amy, you were sort of saying about how Ricciardo will be the flop of qualifying, and you've put his teammate in pretty high regard for the race, have you not?
Yeah, because he's going to smoke him. But no, I just think Yuki Tsunoda's been on fire. Obviously, not as good as weekend last week, but I think he'll be back to normal ways, and potentially even, with a point. I mean, RB are bringing upgrades. Going to be a bit faster. He's done really well not making mistakes in that car, and I think that's going to continue, and he's just going to flourish this weekend. And just totally outperform Daniel.
And your love for McLaren continues with your prediction, Seb. Your driver of the day is who?
Oscar Piastri. I don't think he's going to have as good as a qualifying as Norris, but I think that the pace that McLaren will have in the race, he'll be able to work through. And obviously, actually, in race pace, that's probably been one of his weaknesses since he's come into F1. But obviously the Miami circuit is it's not really harsh on the tyres. So I think that, his problem with not really, how he wears the tyres and things like that, I don't think that's going to be as big of an issue. So I think he will be able to come through the pack, and I think he's going to make enough moves to pick up driver of the day.
Yeah, no, you're very right about the tyres, Seb. It's something the McLaren and Piastri in particular have got right this year. Tyre management and tyre wear does look a lot easier for them than it was last year, particularly Piastri. That was one of the few sort of downsides of his game. Tyre wear and sort of overall racecraft could have done with a little bit more work. His race pace wasn't quite up to the scratch of Lando Norris's for a majority of last season, but it was still a valiant effort over the course of last year nonetheless. But he's definitely worked on that this year, matching Norris in a lot of circumstances. And I think Miami will be, one of the easier weekends for Piastri to be able to strut his stuff, not worry about the tyres, and For my driver of the day, I've gone in direct contrast to Amy's. I just think after that weekend in Shanghai, it just looks like a strong weekend for Ricciardo. It's on the cards here. I think after that weekend in Shanghai, the changes made to Ricciardo's car looked like the difference maker, or the solution between the difference between he and Tsunoda at the start of this season. I think it just, it will translate into more successful weekends to come. I think it's just a sign of good things to come for Ricciardo. And of course, Miami, RB bringing in more upgrades apparently, and that back straight looks like a sort of prime spot for some vintage Daniel Ricciardo dive bombs. So maybe I'm, wishfully thinking there, but I think Ricciardo could be in for a good
What if when you were saying obviously China was better when Daniel had the different car, but Yuki's going to be in that car this week, and would you not agree he's been the better driver when they've been equal machinery?
Yeah, he's been the better driver this season, but if they're on a level playing field, they'll be able to fight each other properly. And even before Shanghai, if you look back to the Japanese Grand Prix qualifying session, it was marginal between the two of them to get out of Q2 into Q3. Sorry, Ricciardo, it was really close for him to get into Q3. It was Tsunoda that knocked him out in the end. And I just think now that their cars are on a more level playing field, I think it could be a strong weekend for Ricciardo. So enough about praising the drivers now. Let's slander them a little bit. Time for our flop of the race / flop of the weekend.
Now, Amy, you are contrasting one of my earlier opinions. As you know, you're not, so you're following suit, excuse me.
Yeah.
You're saying George Russell.
Yeah, literally what you said. Like, I think Mercedes, they're bringing upgrades. They don't know if they're even going to work. I think maybe Hamilton's experience, being in Formula One could potentially make him feel more mature with the car and the setup, even though the past few races have not proved that. But I do think, he might adapt to it slightly better than George Russell. And George Russell, I don't know, maybe he's due a bit of a bad weekend. I mean, Hamilton's been definitely the worst out of the pair this season, and maybe Hamilton could flourish. Maybe these upgrades might work for one and not the other, and I've definitely gone with George Russell this weekend. I think Hamilton will cope better.
And Seb, what about you?
I've gone for Carlos Sainz. I think that the blue Ferrari isn't going to quite be as competitive as it has been the last few races. I think that he could have a chance, but I think it's going to be Charles that's the one that actually takes the fights to the McLaren this weekend. Sainz didn't have a great weekend last time out in China, and I think that maybe the momentum within the team is going to swing back to Charles now, and I think that he's going to start to kick on in Sainz. I don't think he's going to have a terrible weekend, but I just think that he's going to be, slowest of that top competing pack, I think.
Yeah, I mean, pace-wise in the past around Miami, I think Charles has had slightly the upper hand, if that makes sense. He has been a little bit quicker around that specific circuit. But yeah, it's been a great start to the season for Carlos Sainz. But I think that will be, I think it's now the time where Charles will, have that kick on the backside and realise, I need to put in some good performances here. Make myself, provide a good audition tape for next year, even though, of course, he's got the contract. He's going to want to, be the spearhead of the team, be the first driver, despite the fact, Lewis Hamilton comes in with this wealth of experience and success. But I said Lewis Hamilton to be my flop of the weekend. I think, just following on from that trend of Mercedes not looking too great, and Russell has been better than Hamilton around Miami in the past. And, of course, he's just in terrible form at the moment. I think it'll just be one of those weekends for Hamilton to forget. And I think this will be maybe the last of his, of his bad form, of his bad weekends. I think this will be the sort of turning point for him. But this will be, it'll be far from ideal for him across the whole weekend, never mind just the race. But now on to the teams. Time for our best team prediction. Now, this is a very sort of loose one, but thankfully, for the sake of, the ease of not having to explain it, McLaren, we've all said McLaren across the board. Anyone care to explain anything about that?
Bringing upgrades, going to be up there. I think they could bring the fight to Red Bull finally, someone who could do that, and I think McLaren could do that this weekend. That's it.
Anything to add, Seb?
I think they were best of the rest in China, and I think if they're bringing upgrades on top of that, and the circuit's somewhat similar to China, you've got long straights, you've got high-speed corners, which, obviously we thought that they wouldn't do well on, but they actually somehow were really good in China. So, I think that upgrades on top of that, I think they'll be best of the rest and could potentially bring some sort of fight to Red Bull. And I think Norris, on top of that, he's in great form. So, I think they're going to have a really good weekend.
Yeah, basically everything you both just said I completely agree with. Let's move on now to the most anticipated category of prediction of every weekend, our shock prediction. Now, this could be anything over the course of the weekend, and depending on how shocking it is, more points will be awarded at the end of the race weekend. Amy, you were the first one to get a shock prediction correct at the last Grand Prix in Shanghai. So what have you said for this week?
I'm going to follow up with how I think Ricciardo's going to be a flop and how Yuki's going to do well, and I'm going to say he's going to DNF. Can I say that he could DNF in a sprint or the race?
Yeah.
It's up to you. I mean, it depends on how many points you want.
Yeah, I don't need the point. But I'm going to put it into both. No, I'm not actually. I'm going to go for the Sunday race.
So Ricciardo DNF for Sunday's race. I mean, is that through driver error or through mechanical error?
Who knows?
Fair enough.
He's just not going to finish that race, so...
Yeah, no elaboration necessary then. So Seb, what have you said for your shot prediction?
I've gone for one I really, really hope happens. I've gone for Pierre Gasly to make it into Q3. I would say SQ3 as well, but I'm not going to go for that. I'm just going to go for Q3. I think he had a decent sprint shootout qualifying without the upgrades, a decent qualifying, getting into Q2 for the first time, still without the upgrades. Now he's got the upgrades on top of that. I think Ocon was not entirely close to getting into Q3, but he was better. I think that Gasly this weekend Obviously, I don't think he is going to get into Q3. That's why it's a shock prediction. But I think he's going to have more of a chance than he has done in any other weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say wishful thinking there. Don't get me wrong, Alpine on the up a little bit, but Gasly Q3, jumping the gun a bit there, I'd say. But that's the whole point of shock predictions. They are supposed to be unlikely and shocking. I've said on their home soil, I said a Haas double points. Now, considering their sort of upwards trajectory this season, not particularly shocking, especially with rumoured upgrades being brought in this weekend. Hulkenburg in fine form, earned himself a move at the end of the season. Magnussen as well, driving pretty well. And I think it'll just be one of them. They've had decent success around Miami in the past as well. I think Magnussen scored points there last year. And it just looks like, in terms of the midfield and how unpredictable it has been, especially that sort of mid part of the midfield. A Haas double points could be on the cards, especially now that their strategies they're getting right every single race weekend. The car just looks like a competent car to drive. And hopefully that comes true, because I've developed this soft spot for Haas that I'm sort of reluctant to admit. But yeah, it exists. There is one there. I am almost a Haas fan, I would say. But yeah, that just about does it for Miami Grand Prix preview and prediction. Make sure to tune in at the end of the race weekend or after the race weekend for our reaction and our prediction reaction as well. Make sure to check out the rest of the videos on the channel, because Seb and Amy did some cracking work over the course of this week to put out some videos on the Adrian Newey situation, as well as Nico Hulkenberg's move to Sauber, and some more history videos coming your way very soon. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.